Welcome to the Stories in EDU podcast, the show where we talk with real educators and hear their powerful impact. Their stories will grab you, inspire you, and show you the reach of the work we do. And now, the Bretzman Group presents your hosts, Josh Gauthier and Mandy Taylor.
Welcome back to Stories in EDU, podcast where you get to hear great stories from educators all across the United States and the world. We hope that they'll inspire you, make you laugh, make you learn something, but mostly we hope you just simply enjoy listening to educators share about the things that happen to them, because we all have great stories. We're going to have some pretty good stories coming soon in my neck of the woods. We're about to launch our third annual TEDx Deep Here Middle School, which I'm very excited about. It's been awesome so far. So we're going to announce the kids this week and then meet with them next week before spring break so they can get started. So right after we get back from spring break, we're hitting the ground running. What about you, Mandy? Have you hit the ground running right after your spring break?
We had our spring break last week. Today was our first day back, so it was so exciting to be back and see those pumpkins coming in the morning. Just love it.
Welcome to the podcast, Sherrill, Knezel. Welcome. How are you?
I am great. I'm so honored to be here and really excited to talk about sketch notes.
Excellent. And we know you have some great stories we're excited to get into. First, you want to tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you're at?
Absolutely. I am a K-12 art educator in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, in the Metro Milwaukee area. And I've been teaching for a long time, going on 26 years. I have a couple of years ago, stumbled on sketchnoting, a handbook. It's called the Sketchnote Handbook, and written by a Milwaukee author named Mike Rohde. And it first was just a shock that there's a name for how I had always taken notes. And then after that, I couldn't get over the fact that why we weren't using more of it in schools, because it's a way to increase memory and retention. It's a way to increase engagement. A lot of synthesis goes into doing sketch notes and drawing out big ideas. So right away I felt like we need to do this with kids. And teachers have a lot on their plate. So I wanted to kind of just use my own circle of influence. As an art teacher, I see kids once a week. So I decided to just jump in with my 3rd through 5th graders and use it as a warm-up at the beginning of each class. I use everything from Kid President videos to StoryCorps podcasts. Sometimes we'll use paragraphs from their social studies text or articles they read. But kids are so natural at it, and they are just, they draw before they write. So it's a lot of fun.
So that's fascinating to me from a lot of different perspectives. One, I work with the Central Texas Writing Project, and my background is, I have an early childhood endorsement, so I always am looking at the developmental stages of writing and how we can take what kids are already doing well to improve practice and kind of move along the developmental stages. So when you said, we draw before we write, I'm like, okay, yes, because now I'm already thinking about some things that we've had discussions with elementary teachers about, like draw the picture first for the ideas and then write the words, instead of the picture being like this gift that you get after you write the words, and kind of some of these conversations about that. And I also am excited about, like you were talking, because that's kind of what was in my mind, but you said you do podcasts and videos. I'm even thinking picture books would be something, just a story that could be sketch noted.
Yeah.
Is that the verb? Sketch noted?
Absolutely. So some people use visual note taking, sketch noting. They're completely interchangeable. But this is a cool way that even our kindergarten teachers have started using it. They do nonfiction. So one of the kindergarten teachers will give their class all dry erase boards, and she'll read them a book, say, about bears. And so she will just have them, when they hear something that's interesting to them, they could just draw a picture or or try and write a word that goes along with what they might be hearing. So, starting even with the littles on up, you can certainly do that. And, I really think that sketchnoting is a literacy tool much more than it has anything to do with art, because it really is a means of demonstrating understanding. If a kid can draw a picture to demonstrate their understanding of a concept, then they've had to pull out important ideas and concepts. They have to work on they have to decide what pictures are going to communicate best the concept. So it's really higher level thinking, versus kind of the stereotype of, oh, it's just a picture.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it can be everything from mind maps. I kind of joke that mind maps are kind of the gateway.
Indeed. I would almost consider sketchnoting a gateway into mind maps, because I didn't find those very enjoyable. So to me, if sketchnoting was my introduction to that, I think I may have enjoyed those a little more. But
Okay.
so you had me thinking as you were speaking that because a few years ago you stumbled upon this book and it's like, oh, this is the thing that I do. Was there anything you changed or anything different about your process after you read this book? Or was it more of like a...
One thing about the book was that it was definitely, there were lots of examples and it gave the basics. So it helped me kind of cull through what I could present to students in a really easy way for them to understand. And it also had some good structure ways, just some, whether kids would do it left to right like they were writing, or in a spiral on their paper, or starting from the center, kind of like a popcorn idea, So giving kids options to even structure how they were drawing on their paper was helpful. But what I found, especially with elementary kids, I don't do a ton of pre-teaching with my younger kids when they start, because my directions to them is usually listen for the pictures, because we think in pictures, and draw what you hear. So, and then we talk about, if you can't think of a picture, just write the word that you think was important for the idea and draw a shape around it, draw a circle around it. And so that gives them permission and freedom to do either. So they don't get caught up in, the drawing part of it, the fear of not being able to draw a good picture. Because again, it's so much more about the ideas than about anything pretty on your paper.
Like I wrote down, you said that it was a literacy tool. And then in my mind was like, okay, I want to write that. Can I draw a hammer? And in my mind, I was like, no, you don't know how to draw a hammer. Okay, I'm going to write literacy tool. I wrote the word because I knew, where on the other hand, earlier when we were talking about how to pronounce your name and you said easel, I'm like, I can draw an easel. So I chose the picture for that one because I knew I could access that way. So it's interesting because you were talking earlier about synthesis, that you have to synthesize as you're doing it and make choices. And really that's a very complex thought process as you're doing something, because I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm matching it up with things that I already know. I'm thinking in my mind, am I going to draw this or am I going to write it? Am I going to, like my notes are very basic, but I feel like I've already been actively listening because I'm in my little notebook.
Absolutely. And what I think, I talk with my kids a lot about, you have to build your visual vocabulary like you do your verbal vocabulary, or, your spelling words. And we break down a lot of stuff. I read a book to my students called Ish by Peter H. Reynolds. Yes. And we basically talk about, it doesn't have to be, it has to be something that you remember. And so if you're trying to draw a dog, it just has to be dog-ish. It has to remind you of what it generally was. And even we talk about, if you draw a bad dog, that's going to make you even remember more, because you're going to say, oh, actually I meant that to be an elephant, but it looked like a dog, but this is what they were talking about. So and with teachers, when I do workshops with teachers, I say, oh my gosh, please don't draw beautifully in front of your kids. Please draw really poorly on the board, because it gives kids permission to make mistakes and come up with their own visuals. And we talk a lot about icons. We talk about, kids are so visual these days with emojis, that, if you can draw a circle, square, triangle, line, dot, you can pretty much draw anything. We talk about the basics, building blocks, and And again, I've had so many instances where we've listened to StoryCorps stories. There was one about a little boy in 5th grade who had a seizure, had epilepsy, and he had his first seizure at school. And he was talking about, they'd gone to the doctor and what happened and the diagnosis. And afterwards, I always ask my students, okay, what'd you draw and why? And so one kiddo showed me, literally, it was a scribble on his paper. And I said, oh, tell me about that. And he said, well, that's his brain. And this happened in school. And then they went to the doctor, and the doctor said this, this, and this, and he had to do this. And it was like 8 sentences from a scribble on his paper. And so that is what's so powerful for me with sketchnoting, is that kids can, they can create personal meaning and relevance. And the picture doesn't need to mean anything to anyone but them. And having drawn it, it automatically implants it in their memory.
It feels very Piagetian.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's constructivist in that they're building meaning for themselves. And like Mandy said, it's higher level listening. I think that's really something that our students need practice in these days. And this is a great way to do it. It keeps them focused. It keeps them engaged. It makes them build their own connections. And, even down to the fine motor stuff. It's fabulous.
Excellent. So love the story about the squiggle. I think that really illustrates, no mean to make a pun there, but that really like hits home. Maybe I did. That really hits home the idea that this is for everybody. Like, this is accessible to even somebody like me, who I wouldn't consider myself an artist, but I can draw a scribble, and that can, like, I don't know if you mentioned it here before, but that idea of dual coding, where I've got it in multiple places. So we talked a little bit about some specific instances where this sketchnoting has really made an impact on some specific students. And I think people are going to really like this. I think this is going to strengthen this idea that sketchnoting is really a useful tool for all of us. So do you want to talk a little bit about how much this helped with a student you worked with who had dysgraphia?
Absolutely. So once I kind of started talking about sketch notes, I would talk with anyone that would listen. And I actually got an email from a former student of mine, from his parents. His name was Brody, and I had him through 5th grade, and then about 8th grade, he was diagnosed with dysgraphia. And when his mom contacted me, he was a freshman in high school, and this was a couple of years ago, and he was really struggling. He was a bright kid, was actually very artistic, and so partway into middle school, he could still memorize everything he needed to know, but with dysgraphia, he could take information in, but it was hard for him to get it back out onto the page in notes. And so the more I talked with his parents, I said, oh my gosh, I really think he's got to try this new technique that I've been working with kids on. I gave him some resources, told him to get the Mike Brody Sketchnote handbook. And I said to him, just give this to Brody. I know that it will help. And the difference was unbelievable. So Brody started using it for the end of freshman year, just in his own notes. And his mom sent me a year and a half later, and we had touched base to talk about techniques. His initial writing in freshman year, when I saw it, was, I would say, maybe a 2nd, 3rd grade level handwriting. And as he started using it in his chemistry classes, in his history classes, his drawing came out, and through the drawing, he was able to demonstrate his understanding of all these concepts. And just last year, I reconnected with him again, and as I was doing more workshops with teachers, and I asked him, Brody, could you just draw me a sketch note on what sketchnoting has meant to you? And he drew this whole sketch note about how his brain works and what happened when he tried to take traditional notes with all these characters, and just he has a dry sense of humor. And his sketch note literally could be in the books about sketchnoting. It was amazing. He had sketch notes written into his IEP. And he actually, just this fall, I wrote a recommendation for him. He was applying to colleges, and he was going to be doing some sketch notes as part of his applications to colleges, which was just amazing. So I can't even wait to see what he does in life. And the fact that sketch notes just seem to be the key that made all the difference for this kid. And so when I think about that, that made a huge difference for him. Of course, it's going to be great for our regular ed students, and could be transformational for some students. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you've talked about working with students who are currently making that transition to college, and how sketchnoting has helped students in that department. We talk often about study skills at my middle school and how students don't seem to have them and what can we do about it. And in this situation, we're looking at potential college students who are working on those skills as well. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So my sister happens to teach creative writing at Loyola University in Chicago. And I had been talking about sketch notes with her, and she had said, well, maybe that would work well with this bridge program I teach at. And so at Loyola, they have a bridge program that they admit students that are kind of on the verge of not being able to get into the college or the university, and they have them come early in the summer, and they take a course that is a full college credit, but then in the mornings, part of the time, they have study skills workshops. And so I was able to go down and work a couple days with, demonstrate large graphic recording in some of the lectures, and then did some workshops with a couple of the sections on sketchnoting. And again, just the basics. It was like a 30-minute workshop with each of the classes. And I got an email from one of my sister's students who, interestingly enough, had been homeschooled her entire school career, and then chose to come to this bridge program just to help her get kind of started with her college experience. And her email was telling me just how much of a difference it had made, because she was ADD, and she had always had trouble focusing and taking notes. And she had taken just the basic skills we had learned and used them to study with 3 or 4 of her friends in the basement of the dorm on big whiteboard walls. And it was I think the class was psychology, and there was some genetics involved. And so she sent me the wall-sized drawings of their sketch notes. And I did ask my sister later, I said, so how did they end up doing on the exams they studied for? And she said, oh my gosh, they all came back and they did great. That again, here's just such a basic thing, like connect pictures with high-level content can help kids remember. So she wrote a great email just saying, she was planning to use it in her classes starting right away in the fall, and was really grateful that she had come into that knowledge, heading into freshman year. So.
Well, I know earlier I was talking about my son that he broke his arm, and he's has been doing his homework on his algebra homework on the Show Me app. That's just a whiteboard app, and he submitted it to his teacher that way, because I was like, how are you going to do this? And I'm certainly not willing to sit down and transcribe his algebra homework, because I don't understand what half the things mean anymore. And he was like, no, Mom, negative. And I'm like, how else could we do this? And so in my mind, I was like, there's a whiteboard app. But what I'm thinking is in some of his other classes, like in history, in his GTT class, in science, because right now he is limited in what he can do. And like one of his teachers said, well, I can give him the note like that. But I'm like, as long as he has access to an iPad, he could use that and still do stuff with his finger. And I wonder if I could almost use it like a gateway, like, oh, you're doing this because your arm's broken. But then later it could, maybe he could realize the actual benefit of it, So I've got a lot of things to think about.
Yes. I actually have 2 sons in college, and my one son is a freshman, and he's had some challenging classes, and I keep asking him, are you drawing it out? Because I can guarantee it's going to help you. And he's like, yes, Mom, I'm drawing it out. So I think learners of all ages can use it, teachers included. And that's why I've been so excited to have the chance to do some workshops with teachers on sketchnoting, because what I find with educators is that they're open to it, but a lot of times they're getting over their own fear of drawing first.
Right.
And if they can do that, then they open up the door for their students too.
I really think I need to get into the sketchnoting thing. And you're not the only person I know that's big into this world. I don't know. Do you know Carrie Bauckham?
I do. We talk all the time. Yes.
Yes, she is
we met at an
sensational.
ed camp this summer. So
Awesome.
she's fabulous.
She is an incredible person, and yeah, I can imagine the two of you in the same space together is like a supernova. So that's try and draw that one.
So much.
I just have a big cloud on my paper. That's supernova. That's Sherrill and Carrie met at an ed camp last summer. That's what that cloud means.
Yeah,
I'm working on it.
There was little silence.
Not shocked. So, when we had a guy by the name of Nick Giacobbe on a few episodes back, and he was big into kind of this branch off of Piaget called constructionism, which is kind of the idea of learning by doing. And Seymour Papert was the guy who was kind of like the father of that movement, but he worked alongside of Piaget, and they were cohorts, and they took a lot of influences. And I keep thinking of that as you keep talking about this experience and children like learning from their own experience, and it's a little bit more tangible, the things they're doing, and that even you said like the mistakes, or Mandy said the mistakes or doing something this way because he has to is going to be something that he might rely on later, kind of like Papert talked about the gears that he liked as a kid, didn't know anything about them, didn't just played with them, but then later on when he was studying math, he understood the connections because it was intuitive. And one thing that was interesting to me about Papert, a little bit that I know about him, is that project-based makerspace type work actually has been found to be really successful in a lot of interesting places, such as juvenile detention centers, which those are kids that they don't make it in our public school systems, and they're students that we might lose, and that's never a good thing. Like, we don't want to lose anybody, and he's found success, or Papert, and now his lineage from there, the people that he's taught that are kind of taking the torch from him. And you have some experience with how sketchnoting has been successful at that level too, right?
I do, actually. Interestingly enough, one of the teachers in our district who 2 summers ago did one of my workshops to the district, was lucky enough to lead some professional development, and she was an English teacher at the Juvenile Detention Center. So Wauwatosa is in Milwaukee County, and so we have Milwaukee County's Detention Center on as part of our school district. She had reached out to me and wanted to include sketchnoting as part of her educator effectiveness project and goals for the year. And so we met several times to just talk about how she could be introducing her students to it. And then she actually invited me to come and be a part of one of her classes, and just be a part of and do some demonstrations, and then just observe and help her just to find even better ways to help her students find success. And it was one of the most powerful experiences I have had with visual note-taking, just because she taught kids that it was young, 12 to 18 years old, and they were everywhere from a 2nd grade reading level to a 12th grade reading level. So she was reading with them a book on apartheid, and so it was heavy concepts. And so students, some couldn't necessarily read the entire book, but they could understand the concepts. And so while I was there, she was just having them sketch note just part of a chapter. In fact, it was just a couple paragraphs. So it was interesting to watch the students. At first they were very hesitant to get up and draw on the board. She'd read a couple sentences or have some students read, and then they'd say, who wants to draw it out? Who wants to, what can we draw for this? And as students volunteered, some of the kids would kind of, give them a little trouble about what they had drawn. And the teacher that I worked with, Miss G was her name, she was really good about saying, you know what, unless you're up there, if you want to have a chance to draw, here's the marker. And it was the marker was like this power, like it was empowering for students. So watching these kids pass the marker to the next person who was going to go up and draw, it just changed the energy in the room. And kids who may not have been able to read really well, but could draw and could make a connection between like an image that might be really well to represent a higher level concept, was so interesting. It just really changed kids being empowered to show what they knew. So that was really cool. And she also told me a story about too, she had a student who was bilingual, and she herself was bilingual and she spoke Spanish as well. She knew that the student knew more than what he was showing on tests and assignments. So she decided to have him sketch note a spelling test, a language test, and he aced it using the sketch notes. But when he had to do it, just speaking or writing in English, he couldn't do it. So, that's another whole conversation about how images are universal. And there's, I have another friend, Wendy Pillars, who wrote a book, Edge Sketching. She wrote about edge sketching, visual note taking for teachers, for educators. And she's an ELL teacher in North Carolina and has used a ton of sketchnoting that way. So I just think that there's infinite possibilities to use this in all different content areas and levels, and it's just amazing to me. So
fun.
Indeed. I mean, it sounds like this is transformative, and it's not new to me, but I'm realizing more and more that in my role as a technology coach, that I don't limit myself to that. We have a lit coach, but we don't really have like true instructional coaches who are going to have that broad range title. So, I think I need to do more to get teachers to see sketchnoting, because I really don't know how many of my colleagues know about the strategy. They get Cornell notes. I'm like, well, can we give students another opportunity to mark those things down visually? Because force feeding Cornell notes, I don't believe is the right answer for most kids. I've watched that process kind of go through the grade levels, and I don't think it necessarily gets better. And maybe that's a pessimistic point of view with Cornell notes, but that by sketchnoting, it feels like you're taking something that may seem inherently dry and you're adding this vibrance, you're adding this life, this personal touch to it. And it feels something that's organic and something that's more of you than like you need to have your line here and line here and you write your questions there, and then like that's very limiting.
Yes. I think you could just spice up Cornell notes with sketchnoting, and you could still have the line, you could still have the questions, but give kids permission to draw into their Cornell notes. The whole making connections, and personal relevance is just so important. And when I work with teachers who are a little leery about that and are really stuck on, I really need my kids to know how to use these kind of notes. You can, sometimes a lot of creativity comes from having constraints set for you. And I talk with my own students about, like, sometimes you got to be creative to be creative. Like, if you can only use these 3 colors and this size paper, you'd still be amazed at what you can do and how many different solutions we'll have to this assignment, because you're all different. The same goes for sketchnoting and taking notes in a regular classroom or a social studies classroom or a high school history class. I really think if you're giving kids a chance to be engaged, just move in their hands, if you're giving them a chance to add some visuals, maybe have some humor and color, if a couple colors, you are just tripling engagement and creativity in a class that they might have checked out of previously.
Absolutely. On the next episode of Stories in EDU, MacGyver EDU.
I like it.
Our younger listeners may not understand that reference, but I don't know how young you'd have to be to not understand that reference. And in fact, doesn't it come back around again? Like, isn't there a new one?
Probably. I think it's retro now.
Yeah. Sherrill, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
This has been my pleasure.
Been so fun. You've had excellent, great stories and examples that really illustrate how powerful sketchnoting can be, and not to mention how just awesome education can be for kids and how empowering learning is in all of these cases. I mean, you've illustrated that education and somebody showing them, a teacher showing them a slightly different way to approach something has opened up doors, and that's awesome, and definitely a testament to you for sure. But before we let you go and get on with your night, whether it be going to bed or whatever else happens next, we have our tradition of doing a Stories in EDU card by the Bretzman Group. How this works is you have a minute to tell a story, and each of us are going to do it. I actually have a minute timer I'm going to display so we stay on point. All right, here we go. Replace your paper. Ooh, a little bit different than the direction we've been going tonight, slightly. Tell a story about how you used online tools to replace your use of paper. What tools did you use? Was it a challenge for you and your students, or was it a logical extension of what you already did? What are your next steps? By the way, there's a tree somewhere that thanks you.
All right, so I have definitely gotten out of my comfort zone and tried some digital sketchnoting on the iPad. And again, students are digital natives, so they're better at this. We've been playing around with the Show Me app, and just Paper 53 is another app. There's tons of apps out there, especially for iPad and Apple Pencil, but you can use your finger. What it has done, again, has made me be more creative within constraints. So, limiting some of my tools, limiting a color palette, and just like we want our students to, we want them to get creative even within certain parameters we set for them. So I'm still experimenting myself, but my students are coming along with me, and I'm excited to learn more about it. So,
excellent. Oh, and you sandbagged a little bit of time there at the end. Mandy will gladly take it.
All right. Yes. I'd like 1:06 on the clock, Josh. No, just kidding.
Here,
Not that bad. It's not that bad. All right. So I think that one of the things I've really been looking at is the idea of a blended writer's workshop. So with the work that I do with the Central Texas Writing Project, there's just something special about notebooks and about spirals and composition books, and I love writing on paper. But then also, I never write out a blog post on paper. I do everything online. So I've really been kind of toying with the idea of giving kids more choice in that process. That there are some things I want to do. If I'm doing a journal entry, I might want to do it on paper. If I'm writing a blog post or if I'm putting together some sort of something else, then the most logical tool for me would be technology. So it kind of just depends on the situation, but I like the freedom of getting to decide based on the particular situation.
There you go. And I think that's an important and valuable lesson, is that we need to get away from absolutes. Like there's not like you absolutely have to do it this way. Mm-hmm. All right. I spent the entire time listening intently and also trying to think of what to say. So we'll see what comes out of my mouth in a second here. So I try and approach the topic of paperless with a bit of critical thinking, and using the SAMR model as a bit of a guide with that. Are we just substituting, or are we going beyond that? And that I just kind of use it as a litmus test. So one thing that I tried to do recently that I honestly don't think was great yet. I think it's still mostly substitution, but we're trying to get there. The 8th grade math team does this pit stop activity. It's trying to shake things up with the normal instruction, so they have kids going to these different pit stops. And it was all on paper, and they'd have to go check in with this paper. So I helped move all of those activities into Desmos. So now the students are doing them online, and the teacher has a dashboard as the kids are going and can see all of that information come in visually. And then only one student has to come up to check off, and it could be any student she chooses. So there's something there. There's still some work to be done on that, but we're working on it. Sometimes not all stories have a happy ending, but
that's what most of teaching is we're working on it. We're going to try it and figure it out. It's very rarely the mic drop moment every single day. There's a series of just, we're going to try this and try this and try this. And then,
I was just in a Twitter back and forth about this very thing, which is hilarious. So if you get a chance, go check out that conversation about baseball, and I think we got space in there too.
That was bringing it to it. It was talking about the baseball metaphor about how they're not all out of the park, like that it, right? Or great. Doug home runs. Like it's not a home run every single day. That sometimes it's an RBI, sometimes it's a single and a double, and then I loved that analogy, even though I'm not the biggest sports fan.
Indeed. So great conversation about sketchnoting. Sherrill, once again, thank you. We can't thank you enough, because if we don't have great storytellers like yourself, we don't have a podcast. Is there anywhere that people can go to learn a little bit more about the things you're working on, or if they want to throw some questions to you about sketchnoting?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter at Sherrill Knezel. Sketchnoting, I would say check out Mike Rohde's book, Sketchnote Handbook, is a great place to start.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Stories in EDU. We hope that you were inspired, learned a little something. Maybe you're going to try something new tomorrow at school, or even today yet if you're listening to this in the morning on your way in. And please keep listening to us. If you're listening to us on iTunes or Google Play, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you're on YouTube, I think there's one there too. There's a subscribe button just about everywhere. So thank you for your listenership. We hope you keep tuning in to each new episode of Stories in EDU. Thank you, and take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the Stories in EDU podcast. Please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, thanks again.